Hey, everybody, just by its very nature, in discussing this film, there's going to be a fair amount of discussion of sexual violence, which, if you're not feeling up to hearing that, if that's not something you want to listen to,
okay to give it a skip.
Yeah, go ahead
Come
and
back next week.
Yeah, we'll see you next week when we will talk about something else.
Yep.
In the meantime, for everybody else, hope you like the episode.
I've decided to keep a journal.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Podcasty for Me, the podcast about film, culture, politics, and Paul Schrader, where we watch every film written and or directed by American filmmaker Paul Schrader and explore how they speak to their moment. And this one, the show is hosted by two anti-fascist insects. I'm one of the insects. My name is Jake Serwin.
I'm one of the insects. My name is Ian Ryan. Jake, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. There's some slander of our...
It's true. Our insect brethren and sistren.
And our pig brethren and sistren as well.
Yeah, that's tough. I did a lot of rereading of old Black Panther newspapers. And
right.
While it is cool that, I'm going to talk about being mad about radical left parody language, ridiculous language. They do primarily use the word pig to describe the police, and they use it like 100 times every newspaper.
Well, and like when you watch... When you listen to watch footage or listen to recordings of like Fred Hampton saying the word pig, it sounds terrific.
It does.
When he says it.
That's what I mean. And they just kind of use it like they just throw it away. Like, well, the pigs were there, of course.
Yeah. And like I get that meat of the pig is unclean in many and several prominent religious laws. But there's so much more than just something to eat. They're also something to befriend and teach chess.
Yeah, yep. Be taught by, perhaps.
Yeah. Be bested by, in your case.
That's right. Yep.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, man. Just working, thinking about a lot of this. This was a research-heavy episode. I wanted to do my due diligence.
Yeah, I also wanted to do my diligence, and I feel very confident that my podcasting partner has done his. And I'm going to rely on that.
I feel confident that you did yours. I mean, we did an episode on Clint Eastwood's The Enforcer, a film that was inspired by...
Is it Ted Post's The Enforcer?
That's not how we did it, though. We didn't do it because it was Ted Post's The Endorser. That's not a film.
No, we did it because it was 11:30.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And...
It's James Fargo's also.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, those guys, in our defense.
No disrespect, but yeah, they're coming out of the same factory. We did that. We talked about some of this stuff, and I looked back, and I had like half a page of notes, and I remember being so proud about all the research that I did. And now I have like 7 pages of notes. Yeah,
dude, I feel like I did a real disservice to the S.L.A. on that episode, but in part, I think the film illuminates for me some of the reasons why that would have been on cursory.
Yep.
You know, I did a cursory familiarization with the whole Patty Hearst business.
Yeah.
Came away from it with, I think, a fairly establishment-friendly assessment.
Well, we watched Gorilla. I remember we both talked about,
we watched, but also Gorilla gave me a sense that the remaining predominantly white people associated with this story are not to be trusted.
Sort of, yes, right, yeah.
And that's going to be, I mean, this whole episode, I think, is going to be fraught with, and honestly, the whole like story of Patty Hearst is going to be fraught with the fact that it's impossible to know anything or know why anyone did something, and whether they even know why they did something, or if it's possible to understand human motivations.
Any person's, yes. I'm realizing now I should have brainstormed a list of qualifiers just so I could vary them as we go and not say the same thing. Yeah.
Well, it's fine. I mean, honestly, it had me relating very much to the worldview expressed by Patty Raznick in Light of Day, where she talks about how we're all just bips from an arcade machine existing only for a single fleeting moment in the scan lines of a gyrus cabinet.
That's right.
So how can one even presume to have been the same person who shot an old lady in a bank robbery?
Yep.
But really, I mean, I don't know,
for
man.
real. Yeah, the continuity of self. All right.
We're getting into
How are you doing? We skipped ahead. Put on the brakes.
I'm doing fine. I'm wearing my revolutionary corduroy. It's one of my famous 2 pairs of pants. I have a third that frequently gets lost.
Wow.
And then I find it again.
Oh, wow.
It gets
Wayward
in the laundry,
child.
the bottom of the laundry.
God, these guys are always getting the laundry machine, huh?
Well, it gets in the bottom of the laundry basket, and then I put more clothes on top of it, and then I'll do like a load's worth of clothes, and there's like 3 things at the bottom that I figure I'll just get to in the next load, but I never do. It just stays down there.
And this differs from the other 2 pairs of pants because you will get to them because of your strong affinity for them.
Somehow, yes.
Okay.
I don't know why. Don't know what's going up with that. I don't know what's going up with that.
Hey, me neither.
Speaking of what's going up, let's get into our signature segment, the Patreon plug. If you'd like to support the show, I forgot. You can subscribe to our Patreon, where for $5 a month, you'll get a bonus episode every other week covering Clint Eastwood movies from before Play Missy for Me and all kinds of Clint ephemera. It helps us keep this feed free, so please consider supporting us at patreon.com/podcasty4me if you like the show, or if you would prefer it to be less structured,
yes, yep.
Then you can head on over to Patreon.
Perfect place for you.
And it's now time for our second signature segment, which is called the 2 questions.
Yep.
Which is where we ask each other 2 questions. Ian, would you like to go first? Would you like me to go first? I respect your decision in either direction.
I'd like to go first because I have a quickie because I wanted to conserve time here.
Great.
Did you grow up calling it Cal or UC Berkeley, or Berkeley, some variation thereof?
My mother went to this school, and so I just...
Wait a second. I mean, imagine...
No, she attended all 4 years, as far as I know.
My mom's smarter than Patricia Hearst.
Yeah, well, she learned more. No, I think I called it Berkeley, but my mom called it Cal.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I've never liked calling it Cal. I think it seems too... You know what it probably is? Isn't that the name of the Billy Zane character in Titanic?
Maybe.
And I don't...
That's where your distaste comes from?
Well, that guy's like a fancy pants schmuck.
We don't like him.
I don't like him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm calling it Berkeley.
All right.
I don't know. And then UC Berkeley... Well, it's weird because like it is the University of California because it's the first one.
It was,
But there are other universities of California, and there's many of them, and there are many prominent ones. So it's not like a situation where, you know, there's whatever, there's the University of North Carolina, and then there's University of North Carolina Wilmington.
Yes, yeah.
Where there's like 2 of them, and one is easily the more prominent.
Right.
But
no, this is a whole system where people have relationships with all of them. Like hundreds of thousands of people do.
And what are either of us but whole systems, when you think about it?
True, yeah.
Man. Get right down to it. What about you? What'd you call it?
We called it Cal because my father...
Like fancy pants.
Oh, I think it's the opposite. I feel like Berkeley is the sort of name of respect, but my dad is associated with Stanford, and it was kind of mostly an object of rivalry when I was a child. That was my only relationship with it. So
deep hatred.
Yeah.
It's really funny to be on the side, because my mom went to Berkeley and my dad went to UCLA. USC was the mutual enemy.
Ooh, yep, sure.
And it feels more natural to me, granted they're both hulking institutions that contribute to things like genocide and are also like prohibitively expensive regardless of which one you go to. But it did feel easier to me to root for the public university over the private. So it's funny that you were on the side of the private university.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, just by, you didn't have...
Product of my environment. But no, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. I feel like the one that deserves attention and support is clearly Berkeley between the 2.
Yeah. Well, really the one that deserves attention and support is like a people's university teaching children
City
in an
College
Oakland
in San
basement.
Francisco or something. Yes,
yeah, exactly.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you for the question. I've got one for you.
Cool.
What revolutionary person or incident would you like to see a film about, presuming that we're just assuming the film is good and that it's going to have like good politics?
Ooh.
And you don't have to make it.
That's tough. Like, if I'm hoping that it's going to be good.
Right.
Imagining I'm not involved at all.
What's the first one that comes to mind? It doesn't have to be.
No,
I was trying to give this question on the next time we talk about a Patty Hearst movie.
Sure. Yeah, in 3 weeks. You know what? I'll pick a different Patty, Patrice Lumumba. I think he probably never went by
Patty mayonnaise to his friends.
Yeah. Sorry to put disrespect on the man's name. I think was already like you know what? I was going to say like a 2006 film, but I think that's a Thomas Sankara film. Yeah, I would like to see, any film about a person who maybe dances a little close to being sort of like a demagogish or like too populist, but also seems to be motivated by real desire for liberation. And then, of course, gets assassinated by the CIA. Yep. I think would be of great interest.
That would be good. I think I would like that film.
Cool. How about you?
Is maybe a little easy, but thinking about the other incident that inspired the film The Enforcer, I would like to see a film about the occupation of Alcatraz by Native American and American Indian activists, because it's one of those things that seemed like everybody knew about it at the time, and no one knows about it now. No one our age, unless you are a person who's going and seeking out this information, or you are of Native descent yourself, perhaps. It just does not come up.
I think that's a great answer and is maybe more interesting than mine. So you won the 2 questions this week, because I think maybe the type of film I'm imagining has been made. We're talking about like Spike Lee's Malcolm X or something, right? To some extent. But I think from what I know about and what we discussed about the taking of Alcatraz, a much more horizontal movement, and one that was there for like a long time to build kind of a community, autonomous community. So with that in mind, I'd like to change my answer to Rojava in Syria. Okay. That's my new answer.
That's cool. Who should play Rojava? Just kidding. I know what that is. What if I didn't know? I thought it was Rojava.
I think it is too. Rojava. Yeah.
Oh, it sounded like you were saying Rojava.
No.
Which is it's like in Canada, like in Regina.
I've never been to Ubu Java.
I have also never been to Ubu Java. And that, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, don't worry about it. That's weird.
It's already come up on the podcast. It's already come up on
the show. I haven't talked about Dune Part 2 in quite a while.
Oh, no. We're lagging on our duties.
Perhaps it is a sign of the film's lack of staying power. That it's simply
like a footprint in the great desert of Arrakis.
Like a match put out with the naked fingers of a very beautiful man in the Cairo office.
That's great.
All right. We're talking about Patty Hearst. Now,
The film of. I will be doing my best to refer to her as Patricia Hearst, which is apparently what she prefers.
Yeah, and I don't really give a shit about what she prefers, to be quite honest with you. But
interesting.
Now, I don't know.
Sure. She had some hard stuff happen to her.
She did, but she's okay. She's not going to hear this.
Okay.
And it also just seems like she's trying to distance herself from the person who went through these experiences, which is, the whole question. And so, I don't know. I think she should own it. Also, I've never seen a John Waters movie, so I have no experience of her after this.
Cecil B. Demented.
Except for the... did he do that?
Yeah. Didn't he?
Okay, I thought that was like John Cameron Mitchell or something.
No, I think she's in that one too.
Okay, she's in a bunch of them. She's in... Anyway.
And have you seen Veronica Mars?
I have. I don't recall that episode, but I'm sure I've seen it.
Okay. Yeah, I felt the same way. Don't remember. Must have seen it.
Shout out to Veronica Mars. We should get her on the show. She'd be good at their research.
She would. Yeah, she has one of those iMacs that she could use to help us.
Her inquiring mind. There's been so much post-cancellation Veronica Mars stuff. Is it the show that has been revived the most times?
I don't know. That was a Kickstarter one, right? Am I misremembering that?
There was a Kickstarter that turned into a movie, and then there was another show, I think.
Yeah.
And then I think she had a Kinect game. I don't know. Do you have... We can't start talking about the movie. I have a question for you first. Are you getting down there in Mexico? Are you getting all these weird soda flavors? We're getting lots of like soda variants up here in the U.S.
Like, what is this new Sierra Mist? Star-Kissed.
There's Starry. Well, Starry is just the rebrand of Sierra Mist. Right. But I'm talking about like they had Dr. Pepper cream soda. They had Coke Starlight, which was there's a lot of these Coke is doing a lot of they're doing something kind of interesting where they keep coming out with new flavors that are not descriptions of a flavor. And so I think that
Okay, yeah.
the evil marketing idea is that you go and you're like, well, I got to find out what, there's one called like Dream World. I want to know what they think Dream World tastes like.
Sure.
And they also don't tell you.
Pepsi Windswept. That's
exactly.
Cool. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's like Coke Zero Lonesome. But
well, that's good.
There's a new Dr. Pepper with coconut. There's something called Sprite Chill, which is apparently menthol.
Whoa.
It's like cherry lime menthol Sprite. And I haven't been able
Vicks.
Yeah, exactly. Sprite Crush. I have not been able to locate a zero version of this, and I don't want to drink a whole.
Too much for you.
Yeah, but also if I like it, I do want to drink the whole thing. So I don't want to get the sugar.
You want to set yourself up. All right, smart. No, I couldn't answer this question because I didn't really buy soda when I lived in the U.S. and I don't really buy it now. So have no way to engage with this.
One of the things is going to rend us apart eventually, I think.
Yeah.
Your disrespect for soda. My favorite drink. Patty Hearst, directed by Paul Schrader, released
September 23rd, 1988.
Yeah, there you go. The day Ian was born. It's not true. No part of that's true.
And close enough to confuse people, so that's good.
That's one of my favorite things to do. So this is a movie, with cat people, a film he did not write.
That's true.
That he is credited as a director. Now, you were going Orson mode, and no, I'm not talking about your weight, which remains consistent.
Yeah.
You went, you were just really drunk. Is what I mean. You went Orson mode here, and you declared to me that you will not be discussing the writer of this film, Nicholas Kazan.
Yes. He will not be used as an example by me, or whatever.
Because you believe, in your recollection, his name was Nicholas Shazam, and he was played by Sinbad.
Yes.
No.
I was too confused to comment on the man. No, that's not why. What's the real reason why?
Because he's fucking Elia Kazan's kid.
Yeah.
And Zoe Kazan's dad. And you hate Ruby Sparks. Has Ruby Sparks come up on the show, or were we just texting about that?
Did come up on the show.
Okay. And then I
yeah, you observed, you asked, you inquired. Speaking of inquiring, you asked, big sick energy, is that anything?
I said, big sick energy, is that anything? And you said, no. You said no, but Ray Romano has it.
Yeah. Did that confuse you?
Remember when, I guess I don't want to argue that all movies have to be about something important, but that seems like something that's not. She's fine. She's good. She's doing great. I'm glad she's okay. It just seems like such a small, maybe it was just the getting all the way to Oscar nomination that seemed like.
Yeah, I want to push back on that, because I think if art does something effectively, it makes any scale of story important. But I think the framing of it is like romantic comedy-ish enough to make it surprising. Maybe that's
fair enough.
You're
fair enough. Maybe just because it's called The Big Sick, which also like, what the fuck does that mean?
That's true.
It just seems like one of those things that's more of a moth story hour than a film.
Right.
In terms of the highest potential of that content. We should cut this out in case.
No. I think it's good. But getting back to your point, yes,
Holly Hunter's not going to come on the show anymore.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah. Give her the proper respect. No, the Kazan family, many opportunities to apologize for their now grandfather's behavior. Yeah. It seems like not been a priority.
Well, Nicholas Kazan, through his mother, is related to a founding father of the United States. Okay. So it's like all kinds of fuck off.
Yep. Yeah. I think it's good. There is interesting stuff in the screenplay. I'll say that much, although I think a lot of it is just straight up from Patty Hearst's autobiography.
Right. It's an adaptation. We should say it's an adaptation of her autobiography, which was called...
it was initially called Every
Man
Thing.
for Himself and the World and the Nature Against All, God Against All, whatever the
Nature Against All Gods. That's very cool.
It's called Every Secret Thing, which was co-written with a guy named Alvin Moscow.
Uh-oh.
They're showing it off. They're like waving it in our faces, which was later re-released as Patty Hearst, Her Own Story.
Yeah.
Because Every Secret Thing sounds like all of those novels that come out now that have like a very graphically designed cover and are sold in Targets.
Also feels like salacious enough that it makes me not want to believe it, which is the opposite of the point of the book, I believe.
Right. Why wouldn't you just call it like
Her Own Story?
Or like Patty Hearst, My Side, or something. Like
Yep.
Patty Hearst in her own words.
Yep.
Patty Hearst, If I Did It.
Nope. Yeah, so it draws. I mean, the narration, large parts of the narration are direct quotes from this text.
Yeah,
and from like a court testimony, lots of real life stuff in here. Which is not to say it doesn't require the talent of a screenwriter to select and edit.
Yeah, exactly. But I think also this film is a great argument for Schrader's directorial talents, his abilities, because he makes many, many big choices in this that are very effective and impressive, and I think they're quite good. I
agree. That's one of my 3 theses for this episode. All right, number one is that this film basically on its own to me is enough of a pillar to sustain the idea that Paul Schrader is a great artist. And not just because he made big choices like you're describing, but I think he made big choices that are multifunctional and succeed at all of their functions.
I think this is a very artistically successful film. We've briefly discussed it off pod, but I think we're gonna disagree a little bit about our fork score, basically. Our like relative is the movie ultimately a thumb up or a thumb down?
Right. And I actually do think this is one worth disagreeing about. One, because it to me gets so close to being a great work.
Right.
And 2, because I think the Reefer Madness side of it is so dog shit that I have to, like, it's hard for me. It was hard for me to watch parts of this movie because of the levels of screed that it reaches.
What's frustrating is that it is hard to figure out, like when you do the research on this, on the S.L.A., the Symbionese Liberation Army, it only leads to more questions. And so, like, for example,
that is true. Yes.
If as has been suggested by research published in the Ann Arbor Gazette, what is the name of the newspaper?
The Ann Arbor Sun.
The Ann Arbor Sun. That sounds like me. It's where my dad is from.
It's true.
That's true. It's just a real thing. It's according to research published in that paper by Dick Russell and investigated by a number of people.
Largely Lake Headley, a private detective. We're going to explain who all these people are.
We will, but it's entirely possible that Sing-Q and other members of the S.L.A. were police informants. The whole thing was part of Operation Chaos.
Yeah, or at the very least being manipulated by the CIA, which does sound insane. And we will present at least enough evidence to, I think, put the question in the mind of anybody trying to figure out. We're going to sound
so insane on this episode.
That's what
I mean, this is connected to so many insane Fox Mulder type.
It's true.
Things to mention.
You pointed out how insane it sounded that I texted you about the fact that one of the people involved might have been an MH Chaos because he was definitely in the Phoenix program.
Exactly. And you were trying to tell me that Jelena could like melt herself into a puddle and slip under a door.
Yes, yeah.
Like
she
whatever.
Spent a lot of time in like roughly CGI'd air ducts for some reason.
Right. And then Kajo was Bigfoot as well.
Yeah, that's right. All right, so should we tell the story? The story is the plot of the film. So the
story is the plot of the film. The story is the plot of the film, and you're never going to believe this, but the film is about a character named Patty Hearst.
It sure is.
Do you want to give a quick synopsis?
Yeah, because I think maybe a good 45 minutes of this will be delving into the details of the story. So I'm going to give a really bird's eye view here.
I'm going to give. That's what you said.
I'm going to give.
But I also said synopsis, so I'm kind of sounding like a New Jersey Italian as well.
Yeah.
Hey, give me a little synopsis.
Hey.
You seen that video of those guys? Those guys doing a bit where they're ordering at the poop deli?
No.
All right. Folks, look
I have seen this. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, look up the poop deli if you want to know what that is, but we'll not. If Patty's listening to this, I don't want to. So Patricia.
No,
Patricia's listening to this. I don't want to.
All right.
So what happens in the movie?
Let's tell her story. So Patricia Hearst is she's one of the scions of the Hearst journalism empire, the Hearst media empire, I should say. Right. And she is attending UC Berkeley in 1974. She is a Bay Area native from my area. I want to talk about that.
The Yay area.
The Yay area. She must have called it, I'm sure.
Well, probably not at this time.
Well, who can say?
During, yeah.
And she is in college. At the time, there is a nascent group called the S.L.A, the Symbionese Liberation Army. And they come out of student political education and action groups, basically sort of like activists in the class specifically of this man named Colston Westbrook.
Yes.
And he is basically encouraging these students, this guy by the name of Willie Wolf, principally, to do like prisoner activism and outreach, which is cool, connected to this Palo Alto, primarily Latinx advocacy group, or Chicano at the time, Ving Rhames, as they call it in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And
you know, I this is real. I know a guy named Ving Rhames. That's real.
Cool.
He's a bad person. But anyway,
well, yeah, he did a lot of this stuff. Maybe not so bad.
No, he's like a narcissist, a personal trainer. Anyway, I continue.
Anyway, a bunch of white college students, not going to list all their names now, but they get connected to this guy who is in prison at this time, Donald DeFreeze, black man who's been involved in the past with a mix of sort of like personal criminal activity and then also maybe some politically motivated stuff. Not a super stable guy, but they organized this group called the S.L.A. And once he's out, and they became famous initially because they assassinated Marcus Foster, who was in Oakland schools. They call him a bureaucrat in the film, basically like a guy who was up and coming and seemingly like advocating for students of all races. And
he was the first black superintendent of a school system or something like that.
Correct.
He was sort of a pioneer in that potentially neoliberal regard.
Right. He's maybe like a little bit conciliatory, which is why they get mad at him. But they pick this program. They base it on the idea that
he's hardly Ronald Reagan. He's like some guy.
I mean,
like, yeah.
He's going to make students have IDs, which they identify as something fascist. But when they kill this guy, most of the left groups in the Bay Area immediately denounce this as like an insane act, including the Black Panthers, who are not shying away from killing. So this is not like just because this is a violent action, specifically because this is a violent action that seems to be aimed at people who are already doing good things in the community or
at the very
decently
least
good.
Extraordinarily low on the list of enemies of the people. Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, so they've done this. 2 of their members get caught, go to jail, and as a way to sort of leverage the California state government to get them out of jail, they kidnap Patricia Hearst. They break into her apartment, take her. To give the very, very brief version from there, she's held captive. They release a bunch of communiques.
She's like 19, right?
Yes. Yeah, 19. They release a bunch of communiques asking for her father to organize some food drives, effectively, which we discussed on our Enforcer episode, and we'll get into detail about here, but called People in Need. And they do happen. Some of them are successful. Some of them are a little bit chaotic. But after that, Patricia Hearst is maybe being exposed to these ideas, either coerced and conditioned or just educated, depending on who you ask, about revolutionary ideas. And in the course of about 2 months, she changes from being a captive in a closet to somebody who goes out on a bank robbery with them under the revolutionary name of Tanya. And they continue with this sort of like string of semi-criminal activity. They move to L.A. because they're being chased by the cops and the FBI. And then most of the members of the S.L.A. are attacked in a raid and killed when the police basically set fire to the building and burn everybody to death inside.
Tragically, DeFreeze dies before he's able to find a cure for his cryogenically frozen terminally ill wife.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. This is kind of a film about Batman-like figures and this sort of desire to hunt down degenerate, subversive elements.
I guess. I mean, those people aren't on screen.
No, that's true. But yeah, but this is the threat that hangs over them.
Right.
Anyway.
There's the part where Q buries the whole police department in a big hole in the ground. And it's, I guess they're supposed to be down there for like 6 months, but there's absolutely no indication of like the effect that would have on.
He's talking about Dark Knight
Matthew
Rising.
Modine is there. Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Anyway, they die. Tanya, aka Patricia Hearst, is left alive with 2 of the core members of the S.L.A., the Harrises, and they take her, they flee across the country, they come back to California, they continue to engage in bank robberies until finally all of them are caught, and Patricia Hearst is taken to trial. obviously the public is sort of torn between thinking that she is a victim and she represents sort of like innocent upper class white womanhood under threat from these revolutionaries, or she represents young white college students who are converted to radical ideas, and she herself is a great danger to public society. She is sentenced ultimately to 7 years in prison, but then her sentence is commuted by Jimmy Carter, and she gets out. Although that stuff, the film ends with her being in prison seeking the commutation of her sentence.
And the final act of America's finest president, William Jefferson Clinton, is to pardon Patty Hearst.
Right. Yes. That after the film comes out, but ultimately she is pardoned completely and her record's expunged.
Yeah.
So that is what happens to her. There are many, many questions in here. One of the ones that I didn't get into detail about, but just to give people a sense of how fraught this is, like Jake was saying, is that she had a sexual relationship with at least one of the people in her house, if not more. And she maintains, and there's, I think, good reason to believe that this was rape effectively, or at least was rape for some amount of it. And who knows how it evolved from there. But this was the type of thing that also sort of turned the public against her, because they saw this as like a very traditional corruption of womanhood idea. Of
it's like the fucking Searchers. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's exactly like the Searchers, which Schrader continues to remake. I saw this. I'm so sorry to talk about posts, but it's not really about the post.
All right.
But somebody pointed out that there's a shot in Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones where Anakin is he's hunting down the Tusken Raiders who have taken his mother.
Of course.
And there's a shot that's like a direct mirror of a shot from the Searchers, which is really cool.
That is cool.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a film brag guy as well. You know, he's in there. Yeah. It's not like he's that big of a surprise.
Exactly. Yeah, there's so many places to go here.
So many. Yeah.
I mean, let's
Do you want to start with style? How about that?
Yeah,
give people a sense of the texture of the film.
Well, first of all, I like it. You don't like the film.
You mean the movie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just get that true. Put that on the big board. Yeah, I think the style, the thing that really I locked in this movie quite quickly, because it is visualizing the recollections of and the very clearly calculated for public consumption, or at least, composed with public consumption in mind, with public image in mind,
of her autobiography.
The recollections of a woman who was blindfolded for like weeks.
Right. Which in theory, you can imagine a film that's already experimental where the push is just to have her in darkness, but instead Schrader makes a much bolder choice. Yeah,
he's not going Ryan Reynolds buried mode. It's like
no. This is a direct lineage with Mishima to me.
Very much so. Very much so. So once Patty is captured and blindfolded, we get it's very impressionistic. There's lots of limited lighting, or like single points of light.
Right.
And she is on screen blindfolded. And we see the other S.L.A. members, but they are always in sort of impossible,
extremely, expressionistic, powerful settings.
Settings. So there's a sequence. A lot of the closet sequences, like, because she's kept in a closet, the door will open and her captors are standing silhouetted against
it's beautiful.
like a blinding white room outside of the door.
It's a room that's like inside of a cheese grate. It's like punctuated with holes through which
there's that one, but then there's also, isn't there also just kind of like a Matrix white void?
Yes,
sometimes.
Correct. Yeah, you're right. Where they just cuts to inside the closet and
the loading screen.
Yes,
they're in the loading screen.
That's right. Yeah.
But then there's a incredible scene where Sin-Q, who's played by Ving Rhames in basically his first starring role, but his second credited film role ever. Ving Rhames, who is terrific, I should say. Irving Ramses Rhames. Did you know that's his name?
I did know that's his name. You're saying Ving Rhames is terrific in general or in this film?
In general. I think he's giving a very impressive performance in this film that seems like it is at odds with like the historical record, but...
Yes. I mean, I agree that I love Ving Rhames. I think that basically the way that Sin-Q is written here, he and William Forsythe's character are the top two most ridiculous objects of the film in terms of
Wade
how they
Forsythe,
speak.
of course, the greatest man to play Jake LaMotta on screen.
That's right, the Bronx Bull himself.
He's the Bronx Bull himself. Yeah. In the like direct-to-video,
that weird non-sequel we talked about.
Yeah, to Raging Bull. Anyway, so Ving Rhames plays Q, and he is delivering a monologue about the ideology and strategy of the Symbionese Liberation Army, which he keeps calling the Symbionese Liberation Army. I actually haven't heard any recordings of Q. Is that?
And he does kind of swallow the Eonese, so
okay.
They do a pretty good recreate. Also, Natasha Richardson, who plays Patricia Hearst,
is really doing a voice.
Like uncanny how close it is.
She's also astoundingly good in this.
Yes, she is.
I think.
But it's also a challenge because to give people a sense, if they haven't seen the film or heard Patricia Hearst, the public, when they heard these taped communiques that she was forced to make, they thought she was drugged. And then her family had to come out and say, like, no, that's just how she talks, basically. She just
talks like that. She really does sound like
voice.
It's kind of a dragging and
she'll say weird things like, my scrapes are getting okay. Getting okay. That's a very odd formulation.
Very, very weird, yeah. So he's delivering this monologue in this room that is like, as Ian said, basically like a giant cheese grater. It's surrounded on all sides by holes the diameter of like a Sprite chill can, I would say.
Yeah, but with light flooding in.
Yes, with
enormously
like
powerful. Yeah,
yeah, and so I think it's just a very effective evocation of like
what her feelings of what she's hearing,
right, and the sort of the geometric imagined.
Yeah.
Because I think in images. Certainly, I recall things in images, even if I didn't see them.
Or impressions or associations. Yeah.
Spatially. Just really effectively rendered.
I agree. And this is what I mean by multifunction, because it does have a thematic weight beyond just sort of representing what's in her mind. Because to me, it is, if the story is about to what extent can we understand like where somebody's motivations come from, what is intent, what is coercion, what is free will if it exists, then to have the strength of these moments come through so overwhelmingly is much closer to, in my opinion, like what it feels like to be influenced by somebody.
Yeah.
It's sort of the difference between you seeing like a video of a child doing an embarrassing thing and their friends laughing at them versus what you recall in a moment where you humiliated yourself in middle school or something.
I didn't have that happen to me, but yeah, I guess I can imagine what you're talking about.
True. Yeah. Everything about you suggests to me that you were never embarrassed.
Just waltzed through middle school, head held high.
Right, but it's that kind of like high heat, like everything is bigger than you are.
And then they also, there's a lot of cutting to impressionistic memories.
Yes.
Where Patty is like, she's recalling herself as a girl with her sisters or friends, but they're all wearing blindfolds in the memory.
Or just she is and they're not
or
blindfolded.
Just she is, but sometimes they are too.
It's true. But again, where like your present state becomes an influence on your memory of the past.
Right,
yeah, it's incredible.
Exactly.
And these are like Jake's saying, like seconds on screen. It's so he doesn't belabor it at all.
There's also, there's a couple sequences where she is in a bathtub being watched and often monologued to by one of the female S.L.A. members. And she still has the blindfold on. And at one point it cuts to Natasha Richardson with the blindfold on, sitting up in like a really fancy bathtub, like you would imagine, presumably this is her parents' house, but she has the blindfold there. And I think not only is this an effective way of representing the as you said, like the way that your current circumstances color your recollections of the past. And like, I don't know about you, but like when I think about stuff that happened in elementary school or whatever, I and the other children are sort of like Peanuts style adult children.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like they don't have little kid faces. They're like sort of blurry. The faces don't have a lot of detail to them, but like we're all sort of, I guess my brain like brings them to a kind of intellectual equivalent with me now. And like, we're not picking stuff out of our belly buttons or whatever, like we were.
But that to me speaks to a deeper truth than this sort of objective truth of saying they were 9, because in that moment you felt them as your
I was as old as I'd ever been in my whole life.
Well, and you didn't see them as intellectual inferiors or like incomplete people or I mean, okay, that's true. All right, I should say
no, but not for age reasons.
Exactly.
Not for developmental reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same reason you don't feel the irrelevance of like a schoolyard squabble in the moment. You see it as a very legitimate grievance.
Yes, exactly. And I would like to argue that the blindfold in these memory moments also furthers the film's, what I think is the film's argument about education and influence and coercion and free will, because I think
the malleability of the human brain, the psyche,
and that, you know, the S.L.A. has an ideology, but Atherton, California has an ideology as well, and it's not that she's going from blank slate to brainwashing. She's going from one ideological inculcation to a second one, but they're both active, like, you know, systems of belief and systems of like world understanding that are being taught to her.
Correct.
Rather,
yeah. I mean, I pointed out to you a line that I liked, which is, I think, also drawn by Kazan from the autobiography, but she describes her childhood as being one where she was certainly privileged, but not rich. She wasn't raised rich. And when I said I'm from the same area as her, let me just fully lay out to you, although I was comparatively less privileged than some of the people I lived around, but I was on a fencing team with people who went to the same high school as she did. At my high school, many people lived in the exact block that she lived on and commuted to my high school. And all of those people would have said the same thing about themselves, probably.
Right,
they would have said,
well, because you all know somebody who's richer.
Exactly. Yep.
Your dad is jealous of. There's always some guy your dad is jealous of.
Correct, and you can't help but feel like, oh, that's what it is to be really rich.
Well, yeah. You only have like a 30-foot pleasure yacht, but you couldn't like live on it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well,
unlike Charlie,
we took one international vacation a year. My family did not, but metaphorically speaking, compared to like 3, and you think, wow, how rich must you be to take 3 of those? Right.
Exactly. And then the family taking 3 of them is like, well, I mean, we had to carry our own luggage or whatever, you know, or we had to fly commercial. We only flew first class. We didn't fly private.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. So you're right. This is the invisible ideology.
To quote another film, Star Wars film starring the future Mr. Natasha Richardson. There's always a bigger fish.
That's true. Yep. That's exactly right. So this is the transition that she makes. You're absolutely right. And it's one that you feel the new thing. You don't feel the old thing. And I think I should be clear. I think some people never feel a new ideology at all. They just live in this. And
that's an impression that I have received as well.
Yes. So
speaking of impressions that I get,
do
you know about this? Did you see this? You heard about this? This super group of guys from 90s bands who got kicked out for turning insanely anti-vax.
No. Oh.
So the lead singer of the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones became like a crazy anti-vax guy, and the other Mighty Mighty Boss Tones were like, get the fuck out of here. So now he and like one of the Spin Doctors and the bassist from Smash Mouth or something, they're all in a super group together.
The Truth Men.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Great.
They're going to do a cover of the Future song Mask Off. Nah, come on. Hey, we're having fun here. I did also, just on the subject of brainwashing.
Okay.
Do want to give a brief history of the concept of the brainwash.
All right. Well, before we do that, can I just say that I want to be clear. You and I disagree about the overall quality of this film. The visual stuff we just discussed,
right?
I love. I have basically no criticisms of it. And it's not just, it's mostly used at the beginning of the film, sort of fades out and then gets reintroduced, I think, a little bit more actively toward the end. I think I can't believe that this film is not discussed more just on that basis.
Right. I wonder for a number of reasons why that is.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of it is like left-leaning film critic types, film writing types not wanting to engage with it.
I don't know, because the critical consensus I saw was just kind of a lukewarm sort of like, like some interesting stuff here, but not as
Well, I think a lot of the visual stuff that he does in this is an extension of Mishima, and I think people are just happier to like talk about Mishima and let this one. Not that I don't think he expands and does new things here.
And he's doing it kind of by himself. I mean, he's abandoned his, well, not abandoned, but he's left behind his previous DP, and he doesn't have the assist from an incredible production designer or art director, whatever she was. Yeah,
let's give a very brief production context. So, Light of Day, critical and commercial failure, artistic
such
and
a
monetary
detour between these two directorial outings.
Yeah, and he like very quickly wants to get something going so that he can get another bite at the apple. He just wants to
keep the momentum up. Yeah,
put that behind him as quickly as possible. So this movie is like set to go basically as soon as someone says, "I will direct this," because the script is written by Kazan.
Yep,
and so he just kind of hops on board to get something going. It is released by Atlantic Entertainment Group, which I had not heard of before. It is, I think, related to the record company.
Okay, all right.
But it's a almost entirely. It exists from 1976 to 1989.
Okay.
At which point it is sort of like digested by larger organizations.
Gotcha.
But they release a number of interesting things, including their big. They start with like art house films, including 2 Brazilian films, E Tu Amo, or like Eu Tu Amo. I don't know. I can't speak Brazilian Portuguese. Okay. I'm not going to try.
All right.
And something called Lady on the Bus, which introduced American audiences to actress Sonia Braga, our friend from The Rookie. And then they had a surprise success with Valley Girl, which is a good film,
right? And
stars Nicolas Cage, who will return to the podcast.
He sure will,
including with Ving Rhames, who is in Bringing Out the Dead.
Yeah. Of course,
more like Vinging Out the Dead. Do you agree?
I do agree. Yes.
Thank you. And then they have a partnership with Paramount for distribution or something, and that produces Teen Wolf, which is a big hit starring Mike Fox from,
of course, MJF,
the film,
we called him,
the film Light of Day. I've never seen Teen Wolf, and it's probably not going to.
Fun and silly, from what I recall.
They also released The Loveless, which is the first Catherine Bigelow film and stars very young, very beautiful William Dafoe, who has just played the Christ, or will be playing the Christ.
I'm aware of this film. I've never seen it. Have you seen this?
I have seen it. It's not the film is not as good as it looks, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right.
And the 1984 movie they put out, Night of the Comet, which is a 1984 movie. And also, I would be remiss if I did not mention the film Water, directed by Dick Clement, starring Michael Caine, which is a Jeremy Allison favorite that I have not seen, but that's produced by Handmade Films, which is the George Harrison label.
Yep.
And they also, I am now very interested in whatever Stooge Mania is, a 1986 film in which a guy he's a huge fan of the Three Stooges, for whom the line between reality and fiction begins to blur.
Wonder what
Will
Sloan thinks about this.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll consult Will Sloan's book to see if that comes up, and I forgot about it. And then they put out, some other stuff that's not really the Garbage Pail Kids movie.
Great, yeah.
Teen Wolf 2. Just a film starring James Woods that is simply called Cop.
Well, I mean, let's not beat around the bush. So great.
Yeah, it's adapted from a James Ellroy novel. Also interesting.
Yeah.
And then a year after this, they sort of fizzle out. They go.
All right.
So that's Atlantic Entertainment Group.
Atlantic.
And
we do have a new DP in here, as we said.
Bojan Bazelli, who is one of the greats. He is a Montenegrin man. And he shot such films as Gore Verbinski's The Ring, which I think is one of the best looking movies of the 2000s. He's worked with Abel Ferrara a couple times, including King of New York and China Girl. Of
course, yep.
He shot Bill Duke's Deep Cover, an incredible looking movie.
Yeah, discussed that with our friend Brandon Streisnig.
Exactly. He worked with Stan Winston a couple times on both Pumpkinhead and A Gnome Named Norm.
Okay, all right.
Ernest Dickerson, himself a cinematographer, trusted him enough to shoot Surviving the Game, which I think is always like a
DP's DP type of thing.
Exactly.
Yep.
And then he shoots Adam Shankman's Hairspray and Hoyt Yateman's G-Force, which is the
gerbil,
super spy guinea pig movie.
Guinea pigs.
Guinea pig movie. I said guinea pig, but you said gerbil. So let's agree to disagree.
Let's call the whole thing off.
He's shot a number of he's kind of Gore Verbinski's guy. He does Lone Ranger and A Cure for Wellness, which are both, well, Cure for Wellness is really good looking. And Michael Bay's Six Underground.
Of course, yep.
It's an interesting career.
Yep.
We also have music by this guy, Scott Johnson, who is he's another collaborator with the Kronos Quartet. So he's not Philip Glass, but he's a similar kind of experimental American modern classical musician composer.
It is kind of halfway between, for me, Mishima and Last Temptation of Christ, but it's like pretty surgically employed in this film, which I liked a lot. The score is, I don't know, it's used for what, 15% of the movie or something?
Yeah. I have a great uncle who's surgically employed. Well, I think he retired, but
okay. All right.
Scott Johnson, he died last year, but I was checking out his 1982 work, John Somebody, which is a work for electric guitar and recorded speech.
Ooh.
Where he basically...
But I assume you don't mean vocals. You mean like...
Records like a tape loop.
Okay, yeah.
So he manipulates this tape loop of a woman saying, you know who's in New York? You remember that guy, John somebody? He was a sort of... and then it just repeats. And
whoa, he's doing like a Louis LaRoche French DJ thing, you're saying.
While a guitar is like imitating the
cadence
melody and the cadence of, it's really cool. It
sounds great, man. Honestly,
yeah,
this is check
out John Somebody.
Cool.
My relatively inexperienced with this sort of thing mind was reminded of Laurie Anderson a little bit.
Sure.
Yep. It's cool. So anyway, Schrader continues to, he's back on his like aesthetic kind of boundary pushing shit.
I mean, he's delivering on his promise that he gave after Light of Day of saying, I'm never going to not visually direct a film again.
Yeah, exactly. Can we talk about brainwashing now?
Now we can talk about brainwashing. Yes, please.
I'm so glad to hear this. So brainwashing, the concept of brainwashing or like coercive persuasion, thought control, all of these things, forced re-education, all of these, the term itself is born of Cold War paranoia.
Yeah.
And is routinely, for much of its early existence as a concept, is used to refer to the simply impossible possibility that somebody heard about leftism and it changed their mind.
Correct.
It's always the only possible explanation for why, and specifically it's like came about when some Korean War, like American POWs in the Korean War, some of them defected and some of them were heard on tape saying like, I've been listening to these guys and some of their ideas are actually pretty compelling.
Yep. And they said, what secret technique has been applied to these people to make them believe this?
Exactly.
I'm going to let you continue, but this is basically the underpinning of what I hate so much about the political discussion in this movie, is it presumes that you could not believe these things genuinely, that every person who believes them has some type of ulterior, self-serving, psychological reason for believing them, particularly white privileged characters. Every one of them.
See, I don't agree with that as a wholesale interpretation of the film, although many of the prominent, like all the prominent characters in this film are like that, but they're at the edges we see glimmers of people who don't think that way. But
sure, but it's a slight glimmer. But yeah, we'll get to that. But I think it's fair to draw this connection between like doubting that it's possible for people to believe this.
Right. So the term comes from a Chinese term that I will respectfully not try to pronounce.
Yeah.
But that literally translates to wash brain.
Okay.
Which was used in like early 20th century China to refer to like modernizing your thinking. To it's basically like
Cultural Revolution before the Cultural Revolution, you're saying.
Right. And also kind of doing like an intellectual cleanup, a tune-up.
Yep.
But it's then there's apparently like a Taoist custom of, this is just from Wikipedia, it says the term punned on the Taoist custom of cleansing or washing the heart body/mind before conducting ceremonies or entering holy places. Which, like, that's pretty far from forcibly coercing someone to think a certain way. That's more about self-improvement.
And you being aware of your own like biases and preoccupations. This is classic American stuff to me, to hear some type of existing cultural practice with a rich tradition of like you're saying, like self-improvement, and saying this must be part of their cabal that's all tied up with their nasty anti-American leftism.
It's like the guy, the Pope's exorcist, the real guy. He was like really vehemently anti-yoga because he thought it was like satanic.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And so the first use of brainwashing as a term in English is by a guy named Edward Hunter, who was a CIA agent working as a journalist.
Writing for the China Quarterly, yeah.
Yeah, and also the Miami News and stuff. And so all of these, this is like, I'm getting a lot of this from the book Poisoner in Chief, or my understanding of a lot of this comes from the book Poisoner in Chief, Sidney Gottlieb, and the CIA Search for Mind Control, which is written by a guy named Stephen Kinzer, which is about MK Ultra.
Kinzer, yep.
Yeah, and Kinzer is also, I believe, the name of the little guy who's friends with Simon Pegg's Scotty in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek films. Is that right?
Incredible.
His
weird little assistant wrote all the Shaw's men.
Simon Kinberg, I think is the name of that little guy. Speaking of Patrice Lumumba as well. Comes up in the book.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's the guy he poisoned.
Right.
Yeah. So, all of this, basically my understanding of what happened is the doo-doo heads in Langley could not possibly conceive of a world where someone who lives under capitalism is just straight up convinced through conversation and education to reject capitalism. And so they immediately assume there was also something with like a priest in Hungary, I think, who gave a speech where he publicly renounced
I don't know about this. Okay.
Capitalism. I don't remember the guy's name. Anyway.
But this is also to me a imposing your worldview on other people and saying, well, nobody else, everyone else must act the same way I do and view things the way I do. Because of course we're going to get into to what extent they were willing to say we must manipulate the public's understanding of something. Until
So the whole MK Ultra program, and it's not like at all unrelated to the film, because a lot of these fucking CIA guys are expert witnesses in the Patty Hearst case. They are on the stand.
Yeah.
So they just assume, they must have figured out how to break somebody's mind and implant whatever.
They just beat us to it. Yep.
Yeah. And so this launches an insane one-sided arms race, basically, where the CIA is working as hard as it can to try to break people's minds in order to influence their thinking, which leads to MK Ultra, which people may have heard of, but is basically the clandestine program where the U.S. government unwittingly administered mostly extraordinary quantities of LSD and other psychoactive drugs to try to basically make people susceptible to thought control. But in many cases, it made them insane or kill themselves or both. And one of the guys who is so he's this guy named Louis Jolyon West. He's in the army, and then he goes to get an MD from the University of Minnesota Medical School, and then he's appointed to, during the Korean War, he's appointed to a panel to figure out what's going on with these airmen who cooperated, and it's specifically they had cooperated in North Korean allegations of war crimes. So they're like, they're
just like corroborating witnesses to say some really bad stuff happened.
Or like, I was instructed to do these things and I did them, and I feel like I feel regret, and I would like to bring this to public attention so that it doesn't happen again, because that's the only thing I can do to like try to soothe my soul. After what I did.
Yeah. It's
impossible that anyone would ever feel that way. They must have been tricked with Chinese magic. So he is, if you can believe it, then at the age of 29, and with no previous post-residency fellowship or tenure-track appointment, becomes a full professor and chair of psychiatry at the University of Oklahoma College of Medicine. Then later, he becomes chair of psychiatry at the University of California, Los Angeles School of Medicine and the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute. It all fucking comes back to UCLA on this show.
It does. I got another UCLA bit for later in the ep.
Great. But, you can imagine he's like a bad dude. He was in charge of the San Francisco crash pad of MK Ultra.
Okay.
So they had one in New York and they had one in San Francisco. But
was this
basically
the Manson one, or is this just?
I don't think so. But
Okay.
it was basically to like study hippies, and also I think this was the kind of place where they would have like a female agent or a sex worker under contract to the CIA lure men into this apartment where they'd be administered like 90 times the recommended dosage of LSD to see what happened while a bunch of guys in short sleeve button ups watched through a two-way mirror. This is a real thing that happened.
Yeah. And to give people a sense of how contemporaneous this is, we, of course, have talked about the Church Committee on this podcast. This is this sort of like Cy Hirsch initiated revelation or set of revelations that drove people to investigate specifically the CIA for MKUltra, as well as COINTELPRO and the family jewels. So this is 1974. This is the same year that Patricia Hirsch is kidnapped.
It's a different sort of psyop.
It's true. He's got a bunch of great psyops.
And if for some reason that wasn't enough to get you to think this guy was a bad guy, he also, at the zoo in Oklahoma City, just kind of to see what would happen, they gave an extraordinary amount of LSD to an elephant. And then it started like seizing. And then they gave it a huge amount of an antipsychotic to try to calm it down. And then the elephant died because they weren't veterinarians, and they based their dosages on the relative size of the elephant just rather than the relative brain size of it.
Okay.
Just fucking stupid idiots. Yep. And so then, though, to try to prove that it wasn't the LSD that caused it, another UCLA scientist repeated the experiment.
My God.
With the LSD in their drinking water instead of directly injecting it.
Okay.
And it says that neither elephant expired or exhibited any great distress, although both behaved strangely for a number of hours.
Okay.
Which, like, I'm glad that they're okay.
Yes,
Stop fucking with these elephants.
Yeah. Yep.
This is a pro let the elephants out show.
It is.
But anyway.
But I think it's also fair to say this was really the attitude that they were taking with human beings as well.
Yeah.
In these programs.
He's also the guy who went to give a psychiatric evaluation to Jack Ruby in a hospital, whereupon as soon as the psychiatric evaluator left, Jack Ruby was suddenly and for the rest of his life psychotic and delusional. I wonder if anything happened in the room.
Speaking of Batman, this is
possible.
The Scarecrow.
He's the Scarecrow. This guy is the fucking Scarecrow, dude.
Yeah.
But then he's a court-appointed brainwashing expert, which I guess is kind of as much as anyone's an expert on brainwashing. It's this guy because he's the only guy who's
tried to do a bunch of really nasty versions of it. Yeah. All right. Do you want to tell us also the very, very contemporaneous rise of Stockholm syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, the Stockholm effect, Stockholm syndrome is, people have probably heard of it. It's a fairly, disputed, especially on this podcast, particularly disputed psychological effect, where hostages develop a bond with a fondness for, sympathy for their captors. Yep. And this is, again, this feels like ready-made to discredit anyone's personal intellectual evolution. It just seems it's I mean, who's capturing people in the 70s a lot is left groups. Radicals, who are they often capturing? Yep. People who work for banks and shit. And so if anyone working for the bank starts listening to this person explain why they have taken hostages at an OPEC conference or whatever, and they start to think, you know what? Maybe I hadn't considered some of the ramifications of what I was just doing to pay my bills.
Correct. Yep.
Maybe I might want to change my life. Oh, this person is experiencing a new form of psychosis.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard not to joke about it. And again, this is happening in, like Jake's saying, 1973. The term was sort of semi-formalized because of a Swedish bank robbery, like you suggested. But this is... I think the difficult thing to remember is that most people are not challenging themselves or not being challenged to actually think about these things in a non-abstract way. And then when they are exposed to them, like you're saying, they're suddenly not abstract anymore, and it might have some type of significant effect on the way they think about these things. I will say that, with all due respect, everybody is aware of the existence of poverty and some type of socially induced suffering. But to what extent are we really accepting and acknowledging collective responsibility for those things on a daily basis? Or to what extent are we just saying like, hey, this sucks. I hate this. This is happening, right? And I think a huge part of that is because you're walking around and you're seeing like ads for Xbox the One or whatever, the new, the thing. And you're thinking, I would love to have this. And my buddy, he says he has it. And I guess I should try to do the job where I'll have it. And that's all you're thinking about.
Exactly. And there's no connection between my ability to have that for the price that I can get it for. And like the living conditions of factory workers in China or Amazon warehouse workers in whatever, like post-industrial part of your state that the Xbox was packed,
Precise. And if you do suddenly become somebody who says, you know what, I'm getting actually pretty upset thinking about the fact that my lifestyle has been basically built on the backs, the immiseration of people somewhere else. And I think that's, according to my moral and logical analysis, quite bad. People will say, oh, you have some type of white guilt complex, or you are,
or
you
or
wish
you're
you
like
were
a
black.
tinfoil hat psycho.
Or you fetishize people of other races. So
and there's like, I remember this tweet. I gotta stop remembering tweets. I'm working on it.
All right.
But I remember there was some guy who said, I think he was like an Atlantic columnist, this type of guy. If he wasn't a columnist for the Atlantic, he would be happy to get the job. You know what I mean?
I do, yes.
Who was saying, we all understand that Amazon is it's a dangerously large conglomerate and they treat employees very poorly, but it's just made our lives too easy. Like everyone, like it's totally understandable if somebody has trouble giving up the convenience of Prime. Like it's basically impossible at this point.
Just writing a diary. Yeah.
And like, what the fuck are you like? I want to be careful in this episode to condemn violence against non-violent political actors.
Yeah.
But this guy needs maybe a chancla like up the head. Like this guy needs like a slight slap on his head.
But this is a perfect example.
You know what? You can just don't. What the fuck are you getting from Amazon? Go to the fucking store.
I mean, we're talking now about the power of ideology, and I'm not denying its power, but that is how I feel sometimes when I come back from Mexico to the U.S., and we'll hear people say 100 versions of that statement. And I have to say, like, I see every day tens of people that are not doing what you're describing. So it's very clearly possible to not do it.
Yeah.
You are mistaken.
It might be mildly inconvenient.
Yeah.
But like, it's also mildly inconvenient for me it's more than mildly inconvenient for me to have to go to my job to get a paycheck, to get the things I need, rather than take them away from other people on the street. Like it would be maybe easier for me to just grab the things that I want and run away.
But then it would have some type of like material cause and effect. I mean, if you ask somebody every time they order something from Amazon, hey, are you okay that these people don't have running water in their houses? And that's because of how much you want to have to pay for Prime. And you have to like watch a video of their house, and like they have to walk to the river to bring a bucket of water to take a shower. And then maybe people would still be clicking the box. But this is, I mean, the difficulty is that you have just compartmentalized that. That's all that's happened here.
Right. And it like, I mean, I don't think this is as nearly as effective a film about ideology as like They Live.
No.
Because the purpose of the fight scene in They Live taking 6 minutes or whatever is that people don't want to put on the fucking sunglasses. They're really resistant to it. Yep. Half the time I feel like, Joe Pantoliano in The Matrix. I want to take the...
I don't want it to eat gruel or whatever he says. Yeah.
I want to be somebody important. Yep. But yeah, I mean...
But on the flip side, we're talking about this brainwashing stuff. And on the flip side, I think the big question that we discussed on the Enforcer app, so I encourage people to check it out if they want.
Well, I don't know if
we sound like a bunch of... You know what? Let me just rehash it here instead. Yeah. Is the question of if we are recognizing sort of like short-term deterministic causes of people's thinking, which was the basis of the argument in defense of Patricia Hearst and sort of the public understanding led by her defense lawyer, F. Lee Bailey, was, hey, if she hadn't been kidnapped, she would never have become a bank robber. Simple as that, right? So sort of regardless of what the process was, this event led her, like a victimization on her part, led her to becoming a criminal. So does that mean she's really responsible for her criminal acts? I agree with this. I agree with this logic.
Yeah, no, I do too, but...
It is, yes, but it is not logic that applies to her exclusively. In fact, it is logic that I believe applies to almost all criminals who are not experiencing aggressive mental illness, because they had some event or some series of events or some conditions in their lives beyond their control that led them to do something. And that's not to say the things that they did weren't objectionable. That's the challenging thing. That's the thing people can't get over, right? They want to say, the thing was awful. The murder, the robbery, the rape, it was awful. And I totally agree. It is awful to see people suffer as a result of those types of actions. But if we are saying that actions are a result of events that change people's minds, and everybody all the time, think about any action you've taken, I think you can probably begin to trace it back to some prior experiences, some motive in your life that, some condition that compels you to do something. Then this is logic that we have to apply to most defendants in this criminal system. And this is why the so-called naive system of transformative justice that says, what if we just tried to, every time there's a crime, figure out what those conditions were and what we can do to ameliorate them for everybody else?
What the conditions were that made this person conclude that the risk of incarceration was preferable to whatever they're currently experiencing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why did they prefer to attack their wife instead of live in relative marital bliss? Well,
or why were they incapable of resisting the urge to do that?
Yep.
Or why
did they not have the tools to express frustration? Or why? Yeah.
It's time for my theory of why the film is good.
All right.
So Schrader expresses this in Schrader on Schrader, where he also says some other stuff that's crazy, as he tends to do. But he recently on Facebook wrote something absolutely completely insane about Otis Redding's skin tone.
Okay.
That reads very much like a Lester Bangs or something, like a much older type of white guy explaining that he's like down with and cool with how black people are black, and he likes that.
Right.
But he says, he may have deleted this. I think here it is. Okay. Right. 4 days ago, Souls Stars. That's the part that's in all caps on Facebook. The summer of 1966, I went to a 2-day review of the biggest names in soul. This was before Dock of the Bay. Wilson Pickett, Otis Redding, Junior Walker, Percy Sledge, Sam and Dave, and on and on. It was, I believe, organized out of the Apollo, but took place at a Lower East Side theater. I went alone both nights. I was taking summer courses at Columbia. I can find no record of it. Does this ring anyone's memory bell? Fine post. Paul is unable to not post this as a comment to continue the thought.
Great.
The cool thing about Otis Redding was his blackness.
I wonder if this is going to be essentializing at all.
I mean, it's direct.
Yeah.
He says, pre-Otis soul singers were all graded on a scale of white, but Otis was, and this is Paul Schrader saying this, Otis was black, negroid black, and sexier and more macho than anything out of Motown. He broke the sex meter.
He put this on Facebook in the same year that Patty Hearst came out, you're saying, in 1988?
No, it was more recent. It was 3 days ago, actually, this comment. He broke the sex meter. He was the first African, Negro, Middle American white chick swooned over. More than, well, he means Poitiers, but he says Portier. And white guys wanted to be him, and he sweat. This wasn't spoken of much at the time, but it was the truth. So he is like trying to express that Otis Redding was darker complected than previously allowed to get famous black singers, and that this perhaps represented an important incremental shift in what American pop culture could do. You
Some
don't have to say Negroid in that.
No.
I don't say it. I actually have never found cause to say it.
Neither outside of a direct quote. Yeah,
outside
never
of a direct
in my whole
quote.
life. Yeah, and you're telling me this is part of your argument for why the film is good? Because this is very directly going to support my argument for why the film is bad.
This is actually distinct from my argument for why the film is good. So it says, so the guy who interviewing in Schrader on Schrader, and this is from 1996. says the film is very good at conveying her feelings of disorientation and the uncertainty or plasticity of character that accompanied them. And Schrader says, in one sense, there seems to me no doubt that she did become a revolutionary, but was she Patty Hearst when that happened, or was she someone else? It's a genuine conundrum, and I realized very early on that there is no solution. If you ask the question, did she or didn't she, the answer is yes and no all the time. And then he explains that the government has done research to show that it doesn't even take 57 days of solitary to change someone's personality. About 10 days is all it takes. So I think what the film is getting at through, and I think this is present in almost every interaction in it, is that questions of coercion or intent or choice, free will, consent are all so much murkier and more constantly shifting than especially the criminal justice system has any framework to handle.
Yeah, like a district attorney is qualified to assess, for example.
Right, and even like the law requires that you figure out. I mean, there's even if the district attorney had been to enough graduate seminars in psychology
there is
or
no
something,
number. Yeah,
the system is designed for someone to either have been capable of making the conscious decision or not.
Right, a binary identification. Yep.
And I think what the film constantly shows, and look, I want to be very clear that it's extraordinarily dangerous to question anyone's allegation that they have been raped. If someone says they were raped, then I'm going to tend to believe them without extraordinary contradictory evidence of a kind that I don't think I've ever seen in my life. So I think that the way consent actually works is more that it's extraordinarily difficult to prove that someone is entirely consenting. And it's like in all, when in doubt, lean toward they're not. Like lean toward that someone is doing this. And also consent, I think, is the binary of consent is, I think, does a disservice to the complicated reasons why people would choose to do things. And I say this as someone who has not, to my knowledge, experienced sexual assault, and I'm deeply privileged and grateful for that. Yep. But I certainly understand having to do things that I don't want to do, because that's basically everything that I ever do. I mean, I don't want to go to work.
Yeah. And look, I don't think you're minimizing at all. And I hope people don't take it this way. The idea that people who have been raped expressed very clearly that something was against their consent, or maybe they expressed it or didn't express it. It was consensual, right? But because I think also the film does a good job of actually being sympathetic to Patricia and saying, well, did you fight back when he tried to rape you?
Right. It presents these situations in which, and this there to remind people or explain if there's for some reason not going to watch this movie, it is presented to Patty that everyone in the S.L.A. is sort of engaged in free love, but almost a compulsory type of free love. And that if someone wants to have sex with you, the comradely thing to do is say yes, is to allow them, which is just a system of sexual abuse and is not anything that belongs in any revolutionary organization. I don't know that it ever did exist in this one in real life. I don't know. I wasn't there. And,
I'm going to explore a little bit of this more in my discussion. So we'll rock. Keep on rocking.
But I will keep on rocking. But what I think the film shows very effectively is the negotiation. I think especially it's through Richardson's performance, which I think is extraordinary. I think is really just, and Schrader talks about how just incredible, how incredible a feat it is to play what is a deeply passive role and to be on screen nearly the whole movie, purely reacting and thinking and almost never doing anything, like almost never making choices, and yet she remains entirely compelling the whole time.
I mean, the moment that she makes a choice herself is like in the final 2 minutes of the film, and it's like,
it's sort of rapturous. Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
The difference that you see, despite it being like not a visual element somehow, it's so overwhelming.
But I just to finish the thought, like you when someone comes into the closet with the intention of having sex with her, whether or not she consents to it or otherwise, the film takes a minute to pause on her face and sort of show her navigating, calculating in her mind the various reasons.
Which is great. The fear of death, or
yes, why,
the fear of this event.
Why she, what's going to happen if I say yes? What's going to happen if I say no? And making a decision to not resist. And we don't even necessarily get a full answer as to whether she's saying yes because the answer is yes, or she's saying yes because because she doesn't want to die. And she thinks she's made a calculation that she'll die if she says no.
Yeah, and can I? I'm not going to derail you. Just
hop on in.
Can I just give credits, because so often I feel like I've been negative on this podcast about depictions of rape or sexual abuse on screen, and I really was impressed with this because it is not at all titillating. I mean, we don't actually see these events, but it is fully, well, maybe the exception of one, but everything is like you're saying, in her face, and then later in her recollections and her sort of attempts, her incomplete attempts to express like what her logic was, what she was feeling. Like very good.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I have a suspicion that you're going to bring up another example of this from real life. But it also, one of the things that the binary idea of consent in the criminal justice system one of the things it can't sort of encompass is the way that people can feel love for someone before they assault them. They can sometimes feel that love for someone afterward. In certain circumstances, they can feel conflicted about.
I mean, if we can use nasty examples, this is why people will bring in like text into court and where somebody says like, yeah, let's get lunch, and they'll say, look, it can't have been rape because you wanted to get lunch with this person afterwards.
Exactly. And I think this is the case in instances of sexual abuse by family members, where you have a very complicated relationship with this person, where you recall both good and bad, and maybe maybe one of the things your brain has done in response to a trauma is to sort of segment them into two different people. Yeah, of course. Maybe they are behaving like two different people, and I think extrapolating this out toward her behavior with the S.L.A., where she, her up to and including her participating in a bank robbery or being present at a bank robbery with a gun in her hand. And, the whole question is that participation? Yes. Or her shooting at the Mel's sporting goods. Uh-huh. I think both of those instances are also sort of very difficult to extract from, like to extract a solid answer about consent or coercion or intent or bad situation. Like, but every man has his reasons, as Renoir said, and also like you can only act with the best information and the best judgment that you have in any particular moment. And one of the things that has a negative effect on prefrontal cortex style judgment ability is trauma in all sorts of ways.
Stress responses and cortisol and stuff.
Yeah. So I just think that this notion of consent and intention is more focused on from the sexual violence perspective in the film, but I think you can read it in the political aspect of the film as well.
I think so too.
And then once she's apprehended and the state comes into it, you just see it reiterated again. Like the first thing that happens to her is she's put in effectively a closet, but it's a prison cell. And then she is examined by a doctor. She's given some kind of pelvic exam, and it's very clearly uncomfortable, and she clearly would rather not be there, but she is not resisting this because if she did, they would do it to her anyway, and they'd probably give her Thorazine or whatever. So
couldn't help but recall like black women in prisons who have all sorts of non-consensual operations done to them, but were not historically considered like rape or something. Yeah.
Right. And even now, like, how many women get to a pelvic exam and their doctor is out of town, so it's somebody else that they even if it's another female doctor, but someone they're not familiar with, and they would prefer not to do this, but if they
kind of peer pressured,
and also
sort of like, we can't get you
with
back
health insurance if they reschedule, it's going to take 6 months or something. Like we're all navigating a million reasons why to do or not do something all the time, and it sucks. But like one thing that we can definitely restructure about that is whether there is a discrete yes or no answer to, like, did this person do this intentionally enough that they should be put in jail or murdered by the state about it.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And first of all, I do actually agree that all of that is in the movie, and it's very artfully done. It's I don't know if, because we often discuss things in a sort of blatant head-on way, I hope people don't imagine that this is like a didactic film at all. I think it's very subtle and naturalistic in its discussion of these things. And I totally agree with you that the idea that like a judge who went to whatever, like University of Alabama in 1955 is basically making like a historical, philosophical determination about to what degree people are responsible for their own actions, and then basing that on psychiatrists and neurologists who have a very developing understanding of the brain, very incomplete.
Right. And they're like the distance from the cutting edge of psychological understanding that is acceptable to like the justice system. So they're certainly not up to the minute
right
with what is the current belief about, you know, how the brain works or whatever.
And then even those psychiatrists, I would argue, are lacking like a sociological understanding.
Right.
Or,
or in this case, they're working for the CIA.
Correct. Yes, they have very much an active ideological bias.
Killing elephants with LSD for some non-specific national defense aim, you know?
Yeah. And in response to that, I want to shout out, because often we sort of just raise questions. And I will say that, you know, this is the reason that activists and
race
feminists specifically... Race questions, yeah. It's Montenegrin. And is like ideas of explicit consent, or, you know, being able to, which we can even still say is a simplification, but if you're in a sexual or intimate moment with somebody and having them actively give you a yes, I'm not even saying that there's not going to be, like you're saying, maybe the coercion of just saying, oh, I don't really feel like it, but like I care more about making you happy than I care about watching a movie I plan to watch or something. I mean, that's
right.
a type of very light coercion. But at the very least, if hopefully the person has the chance to vocalize a yes, there's more of a chance that they will be genuinely consenting or not be emotionally damaged by this encounter.
And in every relationship, there are disappointments or conflicts that are surmountable, and there are some that are insurmountable, and like ideally they're all surmountable. And if there's I've heard the term gray rape, which even by itself seems disrespectful to all kinds of people, but like, you know, sometimes sexual encounters are uncomfortable in a way that should be prevented at all costs in the future, but is not criminal. You know, sometimes like this is a communication problem. And to be clear also, like this is my way of trying to understand how like this binary idea of like either you're totally on board with it or you're totally not on board with it doesn't encompass human experience. And we should tend toward if both people aren't like, if you're not sure, don't do it.
That it was probably coerced. Exactly.
Yeah. So like, just be really sure is all I'm saying. But we need to acknowledge that, there's lots of ways to be unsure about things and do them anyway. And that's like a valid way to live your life. And you're not like, you didn't let somebody do something bad to you because you're a bad person if that happened to you. That's all.
Or because for a second you questioned it or something. Yeah. I think that's exactly right. All right. Well, while I acknowledge all that's in the film, I would like to lay out my other two theses. My objections.
You call me wall-eyed?
I didn't, but cool old school attack.
I had a gym teacher look like that named Mr. Pulick.
Okay.
Imagine, I mean, honestly, now I feel bad for him going through life being named Mr. Pulick. But he used to tell kids he didn't like to go play in the street.
Okay, all right. So he had his issues as well. Okay. Basically, I'll just say straight up front, my theses fall into, the summary version is, number one, I think the Symbionese Liberation Army was in real life a representation of many of the worst aspects of actual far left groups. And I'm including in there, they were sort of like fantasy role playing a lot of the time about like how many people were in their group or what their aims were, or the reach of their
the scope of what was possible for them.
I mean, like in their communiques they would say, you know, like we have these chapters in all these cities, and the war council meets, and so that's in there. The unhealthy free love and sexual coercion is in there. And that's something, like you mentioned, I want to bring up about sort of how that manifested in groups like the Black Panthers and the infighting, the sort of like not totally articulated beliefs about what you're trying to achieve for the future and how you're going to achieve it, and like what your short-term and long-term goals are and how your actions help people. Not having a great understanding of all those things seems like they fell into that category. So to me, they are not like a totally unfair representation in the sense that they have this stuff. And in Sinkyu, the sort of like megalomaniac who falls prey to the psychological pressure of FBI pursuit and maybe drugs and maybe vestigial sexism or just old school power tripping. And the fact that they then turn to call any critics of those people reactionaries or FBI plants. Yeah. This stuff is all true. All right. The problem is, to me, that the film, now the second thesis is that the film really, truly, to me, represents almost every myth that I could imagine somebody on CNN at the time or today saying about those same leftist groups.
Right.
And even though I agree with you that there is some blurring at the edges, particularly you brought up when we were texting about the film, the character of Wendy, who is based on a real person, Wendy Yoshimura, who was born in a concentration camp and supported some of these groups.
Yeah.
Yep. And also she was involved in other groups by herself and seemed to have legitimate reasons for all of her grievances. She in the film represents this person who's maybe willing to stand up for like a healthier or more conscientious or more personally rewarding, politically rewarding version of leftism. But she's such a minor part of the film that it's hard for me to not feel like frustrated about the rest. So I'm going to give some very, very brief examples of what I'm talking about. William Forsythe's character, I don't know. In real life, did Tico want to be black? Maybe. I'm not saying that type of person doesn't exist. But what I'm saying is,
full Joni Mitchell as a disguise, but it's also, it seems like a lot of them are not that unhappy about it.
Correct. I mean, he has a scene.
We haven't even mentioned Frances Fisher.
Fisher, of course,
the one-time paramour.
Ex-wife. Yeah.
One-time Haley Williams of Clint Eastwood.
That's exactly right.
That's the name of the paramour lady?
I think that's right. Yeah, that red-haired lady. Yeah.
She dances around. Yeah, she is in this playing Yolanda, who is a major character and also majorly in blackface more than once.
They're all in blackface, but William Forsythe's character gets into blackface for fun, not even as part of the costume. He's in blackface in the bathroom saying, "I wish I was black, fuck." And then he sort of like dances around the bathroom saying a bunch of blaxploitation lines.
Basically doing an impression of like a guy that Shaft would kick down the stairs.
Correct. And how many of us have seen in representations of like pro-Palestine camps, or we should say anti-genocide camps, basically now that there's this discussion of like, well, these white kids, they don't have any real grievances, so they have to invent grievances to be upset about because they're like searching for something to feel persecuted about, like vicariously or something. Yes, precisely. And then later in the film, to confirm this, they get to a kind of a rundown house in L.A. and Frances Fisher's character says, "At last, we're really poor." Like this is, not only are they slumming, but they're like truly consciously seeking out ways to sort of live like the oppressed people that they're like excited
that there's no running water or whatever.
Yeah. And then also accelerationism is a very frustrating ideology. For those who don't know, accelerationism is sort of like a, to me, fringe left belief that we should try to make things worse or try to goad the police and the state into becoming more oppressive as a way of getting the oppressed masses to rise up, sort of like forcing consciousness.
To bring back the idea of consent, it's like the oppressed masses have not agreed on this strategy, and it's historically going to affect them. Yeah,
historically, sort of tricking people into believing they should be on board. I mean, it's funny. The film visually references Frantz Fanon because there's a copy of Wretched of the Earth on screen, but in that exact book, he has a wonderful piece about why you cannot trick the people. That's like a short-term strategy that might work and then will always fail because then they won't really be on your side. Anyway, so there's all this. Then there is the leftist infighting. There is the calling each other reactionaries, which I said I have witnessed in real life, so I know it's true. But this to me is balanced out. I can speak now personally by just like lovely reading groups and sharing sessions and discussions of like, what are we going to do this week to help people? What are our visions of like what a government would look like in the future? How would it better represent the needs of the people? And in the Symbionese Liberation Army's declaration of it, the Declaration of Revolutionary War and the Symbionese Program that they released in August 21st, 1973, which the film quotes what I think is maybe the most open-ended and vague one, which is that their goal is to destroy all forms and institutions of racism, sexism, ageism, capitalism, fascism, individualism, possessivism, competitivism, and all other such institutions that have made and sustained capitalism, blah, blah, blah. So that's the kind of like vague, buzzwordy leftism that people also say like, oh, these kids today, these Occupy people, they don't even know what they're arguing against. They just have a bunch of isms that they say are bad. But
right.
You know what else they say in this declaration? The same declaration? They say that we want institutions like universities to not be funding wars in nations across the world, like imperialist war. So they're discussing the exact same thing. I mean, the very material goals that people at Columbia and CUNY and UCLA are asking for today, to say, hey, this is not like some abstract desire. This is a real thing grounded in real goals.
Can I read the line from F. Lee Bailey?
Please, yeah.
So he's F. Lee Bailey, who, by the way, was on the O.J. Simpson defense team, by the way.
Yep.
F. Lee Bailey says, how are you going to get a fair jury? In the 60s, every parent sent their nice, normal kid off to college, and bingo, it was like the kid got kidnapped by the counterculture, turned into a commie, and said screw you to society and his parents, lived in a commune, and had free sex with Negroes and homosexuals, which, of course, there's the Schrader kind of nasty base sexual obsession, we might call it, is suffused here, but I think is used in an ironic way, at least in this, and I think also the final title card at the end of the movie made me laugh about the guy at Mel's.
I liked it too. Yes. Yeah. There is a like, where are they now closing credits epilogue that first of all, I actually think is very cool and how long it is, because it sort of gives you a sense of like how wide this web of people goes. But the final one is the guy who owned the store, Mill Sporting Goods, that they robbed, sued Patty Hearst and the Harrises for not being able to perform his husbandly duties.
Making him impotent by like scaring him permanently with, but not, and to be clear, he was not hit with a bullet in his lower spine or something. He just like,
I'm not even questioning that trauma does affect people. I mean, this is what we're talking about, right? Yeah.
But there's, but I think we're seeing this now. I mean, there's plenty of like, it's the same reason people sometimes suggest that the reason that Ackman and Musk and all these billionaire guys are so
mad at these campaigns, these justice campaigns.
Is that they have like an 18-year-old kid who came home and was like, some of the things you tell me are not true. Or like, I disagree with you.
You might actually be responsible for some of this bad stuff. I mean, Ackman, I think, literally had a daughter do this, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's purely personal and venal, but like the thing is they have so much money that they can affect real world harm to lots and lots of people, which is one of the reasons why we shouldn't have any billionaires.
Right. One of many.
But you know, it's exactly like what's happening today. And so I think one of the things that the film brought to the forefront for me, and one of the reasons that I think found it more effective than you also, is that it is sort of like this question of coercion or this question of free choice or whatever is also reliant on your education, like the way that that the world has been explained to you, and specifically the like explanations for the world that have been made available to you. And so in my case, it's so hard. You know, I was looking to see if any other podcasts had covered Patty Hearst, and I found an infinite number of like, you know, cocktails and true crime covering Patty Hearst. And then also to back away from this terrifying misogynist stereotype I've just stumbled onto, there's a bunch of other like, you know, American crime podcast, the terrifying kidnapping of Patty Hearst.
Dr. History's real stories.
Dr. History's darkest.
Yes. Yep.
Darkest real history stories.
Yeah.
They're all focusing on this as a story about crime. There's so many true crime, and also like, look what happened to this woman.
And you know who else? We talked about Stephen King, in case people don't know. Stephen King, this was like a mind-breaking moment for him, where several of his major enemies, his famous mad dog Cujo is named after Cujo, one of the people in the S.L.A.
I fucking hate that guy.
And then
Stephen King specifically.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And then also in what I believe is his most famous novel, the bad guy is like this incarnation of the devil named Randall Flagg in The Stand. And he is like basically suggested that he was a member of the S.L.A. and that in the book they say that he knew Donald DeFreeze and like they kidnapped Patty Hearst together. So he was obsessed with this.
Yeah.
People became obsessed with this.
We didn't even get to the part where it's entirely probable that Patty Hearst was familiar with DeFreeze from prison education programs she had participated in as a college student.
I mean, I'm going to talk about informant stuff in a second. So
let's get to it.
So, all right. One of the last elements of the movie that I want to talk about, and I think they engage with something important in real life. Yes, it was definitely one of the last elements of the movie. No, there's a moment where Patty Hearst and the Harrises, the Francis Fisher and William Forsythe couple, are watching the cops raid the house where the rest of the S.L.A. is.
Right, because they just incidentally, they're out of the house because they went to go buy some guns, and William Forsythe couldn't help himself but steal some guns.
Right.
And there is an altercation, which is when Patty shoots the rifle into the sign of the sporting goods store. And
to defend them, kind of help them escape.
So they're cooling off. They're riding around, and because they don't want to go back to the house to attract police attention, and that's why they're incidentally out of the house.
Right. They end up at this motel near Disneyland, and there's
it's gonna come up. Don't worry.
All right. Another very stupid parody of leftists where they say like just like pigs to worship a mouse. Okay, I don't know what that means, but
Timothy the rat in Charlotte's Web is not worshipped exactly, but he's also not a mouse. So anyway,
but he is helpful, although he's a scamp. All right, but there's a very effective moment where they're watching the demise of their fellow members on TV. First of all, just kind of a nice mid-century observation to say that now we all are experiencing history, including people in the group are experiencing it like through the removal of television. Right. But Patty herself seems to not be able to help but feel sad watching. She says them die exactly as they expected. The FBI and the cops are burning them alive.
What's really effective about this to me is like realizing they think I'm in there. This is how they would treat me.
Right. This is a tiny moment of it feels like Schrader is saying, regardless of how much she was coerced into some awareness of the failures of the system, this is a moment where she can maybe like personally say, they would have let me die if I was there. This is the system as it exists. But my objection is to the fact that this is like one moment compared to the rest of the moments where the idea that the FBI is spying on people, that cops are following them, is like a laugh line, I think, in the film, where Donald DeFreeze is portrayed as the police described him, which was like a schizoid personality. The idea...
Right. And it, very briefly should mention for anybody who doesn't know that the diagnosis of schizophrenia is overwhelmingly more common in Black people than in any other ethnic group.
Yep.
That's the diagnosis, not the presence
not
of
the actual
schizophrenia.
Condition. Yeah. That's a commentary about the medical community, not the Black community. So my frustration is that in real life, the Black Panthers, the Nation of Islam, SNCC, any other number of groups, RAM, all these people, you can go check this out. I encourage people to go find what I shared with you, Jake, which is the FBI declassified documents in this thing called The Vault, which is their documents about COINTELPRO activity against Black extremists. And in these documents, there's hundreds of pages of these documents because of how ongoing these efforts were. But huge parts of their efforts were not just to like catch these people or shoot them or torture them, although those things are all mentioned as well. But huge parts of it were to bad jacket them, which is sort of like to discredit members of organizations within the organization or turn organizations against each other or
Right.
set up situations where they might believe that they're in conflict, plant real provocateurs, but also accuse people of being provocateurs so that they would attack each other.
Just sowing discord, just infiltrating and destroying. Yeah.
I believe they literally use the phrase sowing discord. So the consequences of this in real life were so high. I mean, people like Kwame Ture, aka Stokely Carmichael, he was basically like run out of the Black Panthers and SNCC and stuff because the FBI succeeded in convincing people like Huey Newton that he was some type of undercover agent. A man by the name of John Huggins was killed on UCLA campus. He was a Black Panther because COINTELPRO instigated feuding with another pro-Black group.
And while Schrader was there.
Yeah. So
Schrader was physically on campus, yeah.
Right. So this is not hypothetical. This is not a paranoid delusion. And
Right.
I want to talk about Ericka Huggins.
Well, real quick, just one quick add on to this to prove my theory of the film. But also, I mean, even this notion, which I think is complicated by something like Judas and the Black Messiah, like the idea that someone even if DeFreeze is as a police informant, that doesn't necessarily mean that he is now on the side of the police.
Right.
There are triple agents, there are double agents even for oneself. There are people playing both sides. The reasons why someone agrees to do something are almost never because they 100% believe in the cause. It's always complicated.
Yep. You're exactly right. I want to shout out two books. There's this book called Black Against Empire.
You're going to shout the whole book?
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy's going to
really
go
fast.
Horse.
It's true.
Like Venom in the trailer.
Like
for the,
okay.
Okay.
All right. That's a great book about a lot of the sort of like complexities of the way, like you're saying, people either were turned against each other or felt that they were turned against each other, or these sort of like extremely hard to pull apart webs. But
it's
also
quick read
this,
too.
Very quick
book.
read.
It's just a joke about how the book's long.
Yeah. And then this oral history with Ericka Huggins, the wife of this man who was murdered. So she, to me, is an interesting foil to the Patricia Hearst character because she was one of the biggest female names in the Black Panthers. The other, some of the others are, of course, Kathleen Cleaver, and Elaine Brown, who became the only female president of the Black Panthers. But Ericka Huggins, she ran the Oakland Community School for like 8 years. She was involved in maybe less savory things, but maybe understandable things, including the possible torture of this guy who might have been a police informant named Alex Rackley. And one of those frustrating, to clarify how confused the situation was, they tortured this guy because they thought he might be a police informant. Still unclear, I believe, whether he was or wasn't. But at least two people involved in that night were police informants, which is why the police found out so quickly. So like their paranoia, although it was potentially misdirected, was extremely well-founded. Like her husband's killed as a consequence of this. The people there on that night were exactly what she imagined. But the other reason that I bring her up, besides her great contributions and her interesting life, is that she felt very close, like most of the higher-ups in the Black Panther Party, to Huey Newton. In her oral history, she talks about what an inspiring figure he was, what a light he was to the community, what very material programs he created, and how well-read and sort of like well-considered his ideas were. She also, however, towards the end of this oral history, discusses the fact that towards the end of the 1970s, he was becoming increasingly unhinged. She says that he was basically unrecognizable. She looked in his eyes, and he was not the Huey Newton that she knew.
Right. She suggests that she thinks he may have been bipolar.
Yes. And she's actually she's sort of responsible. She says, like, I'm not a mental health professional. This just to me is the type of behavior that I understand to be like a bipolar
literally
person.
detected sort of two different poles of his personality. Yeah.
Correct. Exactly. And sort of describes other people feeling the same way. She talks about him coming to the school, very clearly being on cocaine and threatening to knock her teeth out, which is something that she had he would never have done in the decade that I knew him previously. So
she also describes, I think, when he's in exile in Cuba, him being described by others as like sober, both literally and sober of mind, and it seems like getting away from the United States he was able to
getting free of like FBI meddling and death threats and
who knows, maybe FBI guys selling him cocaine.
Right. Yeah. But unfortunately then he returns from Cuba, and on one of these nights where he's acting deranged, he goes to her house when her kids are home, and they go upstairs to her bedroom to talk, and he rapes her. And she describes it in an extreme candor of saying, it's the most violent act that I can imagine happening to somebody. She says, I don't know what other people feel about it, but I know that regardless of who is doing it, very cool lady. She says, women can rape, men can rape, but whoever's doing this to somebody else is like taking away more power from them than I can imagine somebody else being able to, somebody being able to take from anybody.
Yep. But
she also ends the book by saying that she went to Huey Newton's funeral and she read the 10-point plan, the famous like laying out of the beliefs of the Black Panthers. And she says, like you mentioned earlier in this episode, that she still remembers him as a person who helped the community, and that sort of seemingly like both these experiences can exist simultaneously in her memory. She feels
and no.
Exactly. She feels big enough. Her understanding of the world is big enough. And this is not a condemnation of people who are not interested in doing this for their attackers. But in her case, she just knows that she has this person who, and then he returns to do this again and again over the course of several months.
Which she basically allows, in one sense, she allows, because he threatens
her kids,
the lives of her children.
Yeah.
And so she is doing things like basically agreeing to meet with her assaulter to be assaulted.
Something that people might see as like a sign that it's not actually rape again, right? Because she's going to his house.
And she's making the decision to basically suffer and be attacked so that her children are not, which is a very different thing than consenting to sexual activity. It's like totally different, even though it maybe legally looks similar.
To an unsympathetic eye, it might be similar, but it's not at all. But I just want to express that this is not some type of unique case. And also, she talks at the beginning of the book about rape in her community and how widespread it was by authority figures. She talks about it as part of like, patriarchal control. And to her, it seems like it's just part of this wide, tragic web of events that affected her very, very personally, but can also be something that fits into, I don't know, a difficult but nuanced picture of ideas and like you're saying, and consent. And I don't know, I to me, it was a powerful comparison to say, I don't think that we have to throw out an entire organization, because unfortunately, violent misogyny is a thread that we can find in basically any organization that we want to.
It's not just in some small, weird, widely denounced, ostensibly left group in the Bay Area. It's also like most fucking presidents, dude.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and
it's everywhere.
And she also talks about
it's priests.
Precisely. Yes. It's family members. It's unfortunately, like
Cops.
You're saying, it's everything. Yeah. And she talks about comparatively her experience of a brief time of free love, where she felt like it was more positive and more open and expressive. And you and I have expressed our reservations about free love, but it's just nice to hear somebody say
we've expressed our reservations about love generally.
That's true. Yeah. But to have somebody say like, look, kind of like all of our marital relationships were unhealthy. So to be experimenting with this, there was also like positivity coming out of specifically this leftist group that was trying to recognize feminist issues. And again, people like Elaine Brown have also been very vocal about saying like, look, this was comparatively very feminist, but also there was some like real violent misogyny that I bore witness to during my time there.
And then compare that to somebody I believe one of the prosecutors in the Patty Hearst trial said that because several of the S.L.A., the female S.L.A. members were feminists,
there could not have been rape.
Patty Hearst could not have been raped. And like all they had to do is say they are feminists, as if that's like an injection that you take. and you're now a feminist. As if that's not like a system of like a pretty broad umbrella describing a system of beliefs.
Yes.
Yeah, and
exactly.
like one of the things that's frustrating. Here, it's time for the synthesis. It's time for me to
All right.
Bring my theory toward yours.
Do it.
One of the things that's frustrating to me about the story, but then I guess also about the film, but I think this is baked into the film a little bit, is that toward the end of the film, toward the end of her experience with the S.L.A. is when Patty comes into contact with Wendy Yoshimura, who is represents like another way of reimagining how society can function, where like she is immediately pushing back on the bullshit that William Forsythe is talking about.
Masculinist, power tripping type stuff.
Yeah, and also like, I'm not going to be your token third world leadership. I'm my own person.
She has like a little vegetable garden, and she will also just have conversations with Patricia Hearst about the weather, which is again much closer to my experience of leftist groups. Just like, and there's
a very small humanizing moment with Yolanda as well, where Patty and I forget who else it is sort of catch
I think
her
it's Wendy.
Singing to herself while she's like baking bread or something.
Right.
And she immediately, like when she gets caught, she sort of toughens up and like pushes back, like, what the fuck are you going to do about it or whatever.
I think she says like, we got to do another bank. I'm going to be in charge. It's sort of like this hyperbolic swing, I would say. But
she meets Wendy, and we get very briefly like another idea of what someone's political education could be like, where you're having tea or coffee or whatever with a nice lady underneath a poster of Mao, and you're having a conversation and you both can wear whatever clothes you want, and no one's making you do topless push-ups without a bra on, which is sort of insane. And then this is barely allowed to happen before the FBI busts in. But I think one of the frustrating things about the world that we live in, and especially about the 1970s, is like it was harder to encounter these ideas outside of a space that was inherently like secretive and frightening and prone to cults of personality and all that.
In part because the FBI and the CIA and the police, again, I mean, we kind of briefly mentioned this, but there is some evidence that this whole operation may have been run as part of this thing called CIA Operation MH Chaos, wherein the CIA, the group that is not supposed to be looking at the United States, was checking out up to 300,000 people were indexed of like potential dissidents. And Colston, the aforementioned Colston Westbrook, was in the Phoenix program in Vietnam, the CIA's Phoenix program in Vietnam. So unclear if maybe this entire thing was a setup to assassinate Black Panther members. But like you're saying, how could this not be a crucible of dangerous social conditions when it's happening sort of like under duress?
And you see that with Huggins as well, where like there's no way to, if someone is sexually attacking you and threatening the lives of your children, but you understand that the carceral system is not going to be of any use to you.
Yeah.
What recourse do you have except to, I guess, try to make it as safe for your kids as possible, and then eventually be forced to leave the Black Panther Party and like get away from this person.
Yep. Because sometimes the frustration is feeling like the choice has to be between accepting this very flawed version of advocacy or revolutionary change, or just doing nothing. And
then we see at the end of the film, Patty absorbing what reads to me like Patty absorbing the ideas of some of the ideas that she's learned from the S.L.A. into the next chapter of her celebrity and her sort of personal advancement, when she says she's going to demystify herself to the public, but in the service of restoring her image, and then starring in John Waters movies and buying Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner's Tommy gun.
Yeah, I mean, it's a powerful, not to use these kind of annoying college words, but like a multivalent moment where we're happy to see her suddenly having agency. It's also very clearly sort of like an inheritance of her dad's weird ADR, which was very distracting to me.
Very strange, yeah.
He says that like, oh, you remind me of your grandfather. She's also clearly channeling a bit of Sync You in sort of like political communique, media usage. So she's inherited power, which is cool to see, but also, a mix of unhealthy and healthy sources here.
Right, exactly. Should we end with a little Disneyland stuff?
Sure. Can I give two quick pieces of trivia before your trivia?
Two quick pieces.
All right, two quick pieces. People in Need, the group that ended up organizing the food giveaways that were part of the Patricia Hearst ransom, one of the people on the payroll by the name of Sarah Jane Moore was the future attempted assassin of Gerald Ford.
Ooh,
she showed up and
so
said,
close.
God sent me to be your accountant. And she was just an accountant. She didn't do anything weird as far as I know. She just ran.
That's cool.
Yep. And cool. Yeah, the other thing I just want to shout out is besides Reagan saying that everybody who received food from these like free food giveaways, mostly Black and Latinx people, were he tried to characterize them as aiding and abetting lawlessness, and the Attorney General for California was saying he was going to prosecute anybody involved with this.
Was receiving support.
Exactly.
And there were sorry, finish your thought.
No. I was just going to say, thank you for all of his potential madness or potential being a CIA op. His objection to Hearst's like counter offers was that the Hearst Foundation was going to give $1.5 million. And he said, well, the Hearst Foundation gives $3 million every year. So why can't you give at least $3 million? Which is the kind of like sound reasoning that undermines them as a bunch of complete psychos.
I did the classic frustrating, but important. I did some important work is what I'm saying. I did the classic thing of just comparing. So they said if they give $70 worth of food to every hungry person in California, it would cost about $400 million in 1974 money, which I did the math. That is less than 0.5% of the U.S. defense budget.
Yep.
It's 0.44 something percent of the budget spent on defense. Now we're spending a lot in Vietnam at the time. And speaking of which, it's time for Disneyland Corner.
Do it.
So I just wanted to talk about how Disneyland is a site of revolutionary activity. Some people know about this. And also another sort of moment where I'm seeing the limits of my political education in the box, the very slender eye hole through which I'm allowed to view certain things. Slender eye hole. That's inductive charging. Okay, so in 1970, something happens down there in Disneyland.
Okay.
The thing that happens down there in Disneyland is the Yippies, the youth. What is it called? The Youth International Party. The Abby Hoffman.
I was about to say
pranksters.
Abby Hoffman. Yes.
These are pretty annoying guys. They're really big into weed.
Some new left guys border on just being annoying.
Their flag is like red and black and a weed leaf. That's their flag. Yeah. So they're like pranksters, and their thing is like they threaten to levitate the Pentagon, if you've ever heard of that. They also probably sort of kicked off what became the police riot at the 68 Democratic National Convention.
Yes. Yeah, that part I did.
In 1970, they announce that they are going to storm Disneyland.
Okay.
And their demands include free admission, the liberation of Minnie Mouse, a wage hike for Frontierland's Native American dancers. Okay, fine, great. Happy to hear about that. By the way, the Disneyland performers have voted to unionize with Actors Equity. I think we've talked about this on the show, but
we did. Still happy to reiterate
solidarity and support to those guys. And they also wanted, and this one starts off totally reasonable and then becomes kind of a joke. But there was an Aunt Jemima's Kitchen at Disneyland. There was a kitchen themed to and sponsored by the Aunt Jemima Food Company, and they wanted it rethemed to a Black Panthers themed breakfast restaurant, which is funny. Okay. And also now it's extraordinarily funny because it's pretty easy to imagine a Black Panther themed breakfast restaurant at Disneyland.
True. Wow.
But anyway, this is coming from an article in the Los Angeles Magazine by Stephen M. Silverman, who was working as an ice cream scooper at Disneyland on that day in August 6th, 1970.
First person.
This is like a few months after the Kent State Massacre, and the Yippies just like run into Disneyland. This is also when Disneyland had cast members couldn't have, that's what they call employees, customer-facing employees at Disneyland couldn't have facial hair because it was too, or like long hair. Like you
too
had
hippie-ish.
to,
Yeah.
And so they announced their intentions in the Los Angeles Free Press, the former employer of Paul Schrader, although he may even have been working at the time. I don't remember.
Pretty close, for sure. Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
And then they also were going to storm the Bank of America on Main Street because the Bank of America was, partnered with Boeing to send weapons to Vietnam to kill people. So, 300 Yippies breach the park. They unfurl a Viet Cong flag on Main Street.
Wow.
They basically storm and occupy Tom Sawyer Island.
Okay. Speaking of Alcatraz, all right.
This guy recalls being in the at the ice cream shop on Main Street and hearing a security guard say, "Tom Sawyer Island has been shut down." And then a wall of what are called here Disneyland riot cops, but what are actually like riot cops from several surrounding cities in Orange County, swarm on Disneyland, and there's like a face-off with the Yippies. And this is the second time in its history that Disneyland is closed early for the day after the Kennedy assassination. And then it happens again during 9/11. And then, of course, the plandemic.
Yeah, of course.
It's not. I don't think they closed it early. I think they just closed it after one night.
Sure.
And this guy recounted the incident for the student newspaper at, I think he was going to UC Irvine at the time or something, and then learned that he finished the summer. He was working there for the summer, but he goes back to school, recounts it for the student newspaper, and then is informed that he is no longer welcome to work at Disneyland.
Okay.
For simply describing what happened.
Interesting.
And then I also learned a little something. So, of course, Nixon was president at the time. He's a Orange County man himself. Or wait, he's a Californian himself. Is he Orange County?
I think he ended up in Orange County.
Okay, San Clemente.
Yeah, of course. Mr. Committee of 40 himself, as they say in the film.
Yes. But the congressmen, they weren't congresspeople at the time. They were congressmen. The congressman for Disneyland's district, a guy named John Schmitz. You know about John Schmitz?
I don't think so.
Now, this reminded me a little bit of our friend Forrest Carter. I was joking about our friend.
Yep.
Yeah, the guy who wrote Outlaw Josie Wales, who was kicked out of George Wallace's campaign for being too racist.
Correct,
John Schmitz was kicked out of the John Birch Society for being too extreme.
Wow. Too anti-communist, huh?
Yeah, literally. Because he famously said, someone asked him what he thought about, he was like critical of Nixon from the right. Okay. And somebody asked him how he felt about Nixon going to China. And he said it didn't bother him. He was only upset that he came back.
Could have beat you to it, I'm afraid. Yeah.
And then he also, of course, opposed the Equal Rights Amendment. He liked to use a lot of slurs.
Are you suggesting to me that people who claim that their only ideology is anti-communism might in fact be very racist and classist and sexist?
Yeah, and homophobic and anti-Semitic.
Yep.
And then, interestingly, he had a number of children, 7 children. Including Mary Kay Letourneau.
Oh, of course. May December herself.
May December herself was the daughter of this guy.
Wow. It's all bizarre? Connected. This is the episode where we really do seem like psychos. But
yeah. And you know what else it is?
There's only one web and we're all in it.
You know what else it is?
Madam. This is the big suicide episode. Thank you. I do want that to be my final comment, is that I think Schrader, because of perhaps his proximity or his belief that he understood this circumstance more, was actually less critical and too caught up in ideology compared to his approach to Mishima. I think in Mishima, he is critical of fascism while also recognizing humans as humans and sort of sees like what is their vision of the world. I don't think that's in this movie. So this is not the big suicide episode. Yeah,
you're right. I think that's true. There's some part of the chapter here, I'm trying to find it, where he says something like the S.L.A.'s positions didn't resemble any part of left politics that he was ever affiliated with. And I'm like, which ones
were you active in?
Do you want to expand really quick, Paul?
Yeah.
Anyway. I think that's about going to do it for our conversation on Patty Hearst. But one last thing to do.
Watch the film. Watch the film,
Yeah,
folks.
it's a good movie. You should check it out.
Yeah.
One last thing to do, and this is, of course, the sexual obsession check-in, where Schrader was talking about his upcoming film, Non Compos Mentis, and he described it thusly.
I've never written a script about sexual obsession, and so that's what I'm doing now.
So we are trying to determine which films he's written that are not about sexual obsession.
Yep.
Of course, he didn't write this film, but he did make it. And one can imagine that if a line needed finessing, he was more than happy
He was there, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like you to go first.
Yeah, there's a sexual obsession.
There's multiple. It's not like the overriding.
Yeah, there's a psychosexual obsession at the root of like the fascination with and defense of this white woman who is kidnapped by a black man and supposedly brainwashed and, you know, held in a closet against her will and raped.
And a racial sexual obsession, a discussion of the weird fantasy of white women. A lot of the discussion of the S.L.A. at the time focused on these white women who were sort of like maybe under the spell of this black man.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and, you know, brainwashing and coercion. I think many, especially nasty men who are running the country at the time would immediately think, well, that's if you're coercing a woman, you know what else you can coerce her to do. I mean, it's sort of like the natural consequence of that line of thinking for straight men.
Creeps. Yep.
Yes. So I think there's a sexual obsession involved here.
Yeah, I think so too. This is the closest I've gotten to like a kind of where I'm really like, it does feel like it's a significant part of the project. There you go. All right, that's it. Yeah.
There you go. All right, great. All right, and thank you to Ian for being on the show today. Remember to subscribe, rate us, write a review. Helps us on the algorithm. If you like the show, tell a friend, tell your dad, write a communique, and send it to, I forgot, there's one more theme park connection. So the Pacifica radio station where these communiques were read. So there's a radio station in LA KPFK. I don't think it's still around, but it had a 15-minute show called Communist Commentary hosted by a woman named Dorothy Healy. And so in 1974, they broadcast a tape where she says, "This is Tanya, death to the fascist insect that preys upon the life of the people," all that. But also in 1963, there was an event held to fundraise for KPFK, and this is reported in Mike Davis's book, Set the Night on Fire. Or I found this in it's repeated in that book, obviously.
Right. Love Mike Davis.
Set the Night on Fire, the LA in the 60s, the Mike Davis and John Wiener book. So that fundraiser was the first ever Renaissance Pleasure Fair.
Ooh.
The Renaissance Fair starts as a fundraiser for a leftist radio station.
It's crazy.
It's later bought by just like a company that wants to make money.
Sure. But like, hey, that might be something. That's a commentary in there.
The Renaissance Fair, the Renaissance Pleasure Fair specifically in the LA area, is the reason that Disneyland sells turkey legs, because they wanted to compete with the Renaissance Fair. So
yes,
that's crazy.
Thought of themselves mostly as turkey leg distributors. And
so anyway, it's like when Subway was like, "Fuck you, we'll just toast the bread here."
Yeah.
And then Quiznos, it's just gone. Anyway, so write a communique and read it on the radio. Yep. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram, Podcasty For Me. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, or you're interested in co-hosting a two-person Paul Schrader podcast, you can email us at podcastyforme@gmail.com. Thank you to Jeremy Allison for our artwork, and we'll see y'all next week.
All right, now put in the sound of a light bulb breaking in darkness.
I don't know how to break it, so not screw.
It's all right.
So yeah, we're talking Last Temptation. So see you there.
Bye.
Bye.